So I am going to talk about two camps in Hungary, Monor and Budakalász. And as an introduction, I would like to point out that these two towns are very close to Budapest. They were the main collecting sites of the 6th deportation zone, which you can see here on the map. That light gray area in the middle of Hungary, that was the 6th deportation zone. Basically, the interesting thing about these two camps is that in the case of Monor, there are several sources, like boxes of archival documents produced by the municipality, the local newspaper, and recollections which were collected by DEGOB, which can be translated as the National Association for Attending Deportees. They collected the testimonies of survivors in 1945. They have approximately 5,000 testimonies. And in the case of Budakalász, there are only testimonies available. So there are no archival documents left at all, basically nothing apart from the testimonies. Therefore, it poses a kind of methodological challenge to see how we can reconstruct the histories of these two camps. Because in the case of Monor, we can apply source analysis and the confrontation of different sources, whereas in Budakalász, only a close reading of testimonies can be applied. So a bit about the historical background. In 1944, there were 780,000 Jews living in Hungary, which was the last major community in Europe, Jewish community in Europe. Since Hungary was an ally of Germany, Jews were not deported before 1944. There existed anti-Jewish laws from the end of the 1930s and also unarmed military labor service, but there were no deportations. However, from 1943, the Hungarian government tried to set up an armistice with the Allied, and this led to the German occupation of Hungary on the 19th of March 1944. A puppet government was set up, led by de Mestoyai, and the persecution speeded up. There were new anti-Jewish laws and decrees, and Jews had to put out the yellow star on the 5th of April, from the 5th of April on their clothing. Jewish properties were Aryanized, and the territory of Hungary was divided into 6 deportation zones. The first ghetto was set up on the 16th of April, and the deportation started on the 15th of May and lasted until the 7th or 8th of July. Historians are still debating the exact date. And between these two dates, approximately 440,000 Jews were deported from Hungary, mainly to Auschwitz. About the Monor transit camp, we know that there was a local brick factory which was used as the camp, and according to an official document, it was used from the 1st to the 9th of July as a camp. And besides the local Jews, Jews from the neighboring towns as well as the satellite cities of Budapest were collected here. Approximately 9,000 inmates were kept in the camp. And even the trains arriving to the train station of Monor were full. People were crammed into the wagons, and the gendarmes who took the Jews to the camp treated them very cruelly. So the camp was approximately 2 kilometers away from the train station, and the road basically led through the town of Monor, so everyone could see what was happening there. The camp had a mixed German and Hungarian guard, and they also appointed Jewish men to be responsible for the others, which was kind of similar to the ghetto police in Polish ghettos. The Hungarian gendarmes were constantly looting the inmates, and they were torturing them, especially the wealthier victims. They wanted to get to know where they hid their properties. And the living conditions inside the camp were really bad. Several inmates remembered that it was the most horrible period of their deportation. There was a very high mortality rate, and suicides also happened, and people tried to attempt escapes. There was no lodging for the inmates. Only some people managed to find shelter in the brick drying buildings, and the rest were exposed to the weather. And according to one testimony from Pál Szenes, he said, "There was no water, but terrible heat. People went mad. Later it was raining heavily, and we had no roof. Many committed suicide. The whole room was suffering. Women who had never lain on the ground, they had to lie in the mud on stones. In the great flood, the bags were swimming." Some ill people were also kept in the camp, and there was a self-organized hospital where Jewish doctors were trying to help the sick. As for the alimentation, from the official documents, it turns out that 250 quintals of flour, 50 liters of milk, and 200 kilograms of green legumes were required for the camp, which is for 9,000 people, it's basically nothing. So we can imagine that there was a lack of food. There was a camp kitchen set up, but most of the inmates were starving. And according to another testimony from Mrs. Fényes, she said, "There was a public kitchen, but it could not supply this vast amount of people, and it was impossible to get warm food if it can be labeled as food. It was rather warm water." In the camp, there was no water or means of hygiene. There were no latrines, and there was only one well, but the water was dirty. And of course, this resulted in the spread of lice and diseases. Eli Schweitzer remembered, quotation, "From time to time, they set up groups of 100 people who went in the village for water, but this always went hand in hand with fighting." And the last days of the camp, well, basically on the 6th and 8th of July, these were the last days when 3 trains took all of the inmates to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And before the deportations, the guards started to spread rumors in order to deceive the people and achieve their obedience, saying that they are going to be brought for work, for agricultural work. And now let's turn to Budakeszi. This was another brick factory between Békás-megyer and Budakeszi, 2 small towns close to Budapest. Here, approximately 16 or 18,000 people were kept. And the transports mainly came from the satellite cities of Budapest, both by trains and on ships. There were people brought there. And the ships arrived from the internment camp of Chapel Island. Jolán Grossman was an eyewitness, and she described it like this. "From the end of June to the beginning of July, for approximately 8 to 10 days, Jews were transported here on ships and in wagons, mainly from the surroundings of Budapest. I know that the ill-fated were brought from the ships mainly at night." In this camp also mixed Hungarian German guards were guarding, and they also committed atrocities and were plundering. And according to one inmate, Lea Panzer, this is going to be another quote, "The SS constantly controlled cleanness, and if they pointed at a piece of paper, it had to be picked up and eaten, as there was no place to discard it." Another inmate, Ilona Spitz, stated it in her testimony. "Well-known wealthy people were called out by name, and after a while they came back half dead, beaten beyond recognition." So in this camp also many were killed by the guards, or they died due to the bad conditions, or committed suicide. And just like in Monor, apart from the big brick drying buildings, there was no shelter. There was also a lack of hygiene facilities, and many diseases were spreading. And here, the hospital, contrary to Monor, was the initiative of the guards. However, they did not allow the sick people to be treated. They set up 2 latrines, which was obviously not sufficient for this many inmates. And the guards sometimes tortured the people by not letting them use it. Agnes Lukács remembered, across the latrines there was a mound from where the gendarmes took photos, and they especially liked to photograph the latrines. In this camp there was also a camp kitchen, but obviously the majority didn't receive food at all, and there was only one source of water. There were striking differences compared to Monor. For instance, young people here had to work, they had to make bricks, and also, as this camp was close to a major road where the suburban train passed by several times a day, the passengers could see the camp, and there are other recollections, for instance, from a famous Hungarian writer who wrote about this camp. And also there were delegations sent to this camp. One of the inmates mentioned that László Endre examined the conditions in the camp. László Endre was Secretary of the State, and he was basically one of the main organizers of the deportations. And he also took a tour, basically, in the ghettos and camps to see how the conditions are. So this could have happened, really. And according to other inmates, there were diplomats and intellectuals coming to the camp. One of them mentioned that Justinian Serédi, who was the leader of the Catholic Church in Hungary, came to the camp to see it. And another testimony in a post-war trial given by István Bárci, who was a former Secretary of the State, he said that the Swiss and Swedish ambassadors and other ambassadors also visited this camp. And in his testimony he said, "It was scandalously crowded. I saw it with my own eyes." The deportations also took place on the 6th and 8th of July. And just like in Monor, before that, the guards spread rumors that the Jews will be taken to Kenyérmező for agricultural work. Kenyérmező is today in Romania, but at that time it was part of Hungary. And as conclusion, we can say that these two camps, Monor and Budakalász, are good examples of how such spaces of exclusion were organized in Hungary. We can learn a great deal about circumstances and the organization itself in these camps. And there are striking similarities, which I believe are basically a combination of the experiences of the Nazis and their effectiveness and the Hungarian characteristics. And the title, this quotation that I put in the title, "It was more horrible than in Auschwitz," was mentioned in both cases by the survivors. The differences are that even though in the case of Budakalász there are no official documents left, this camp still received more publicity, if I may call it this way, and still we don't have any information on the organization of this camp, unlike in the case of Monor, where there are lots of official documents left. So basically these two camps show us how the last phase of the mass deportations from Hungary were conducted and the local specificities. So thank you for your attention.